morning. Welcome to the new lactation law, what every employer needs to know during COVID-19 and beyond. I'm Megan Loach. I'm the Healthy Communities Coordinator with the Department of Health's Chronic Disease Prevention Unit. Our work focuses on initiatives and projects that makes policy systems and environmental changes to help reduce chronic diseases across the lifespan. Today's presentation will address the intersection of lactation, accommodation laws, and CDC guidelines on infection prevention and best practices for creating lactation spaces to fully support lactating employees. I will be your moderator today, and I'd like to first introduce our speakers. Our first speaker, Jessica Lee, is a staff attorney at the Center for Work-Life Law and co-founder of the Center's Nursing Mothers Law Project. She works to advance gender equality in the workplace and in education and is nationally recognized expert on discrimination related to pregnancy and breastfeeding. Lee's writings have been featured in publications ranging from the Harvard Business Review and the Chronicle of Higher Education to journals Breastfeeding Medicine and Midwifery and Women's Health. She is the co-author of the study Exposed Discrimination Against Breastfeeding Workers with Joan C. Williams and Liz Morris. We are also joined today by Angela Love-Zaranka and Monica Brannon. Angela is a lactation consultant who has supported families in a community, hospital, or private practice setting for over 30 years. Monica is a 19-year veteran nurse and lactation consultant at a baby-friendly hospital where she provides expert care in English and Spanish. Angela is chair of the Virginia Breastfeeding Coalition, and Monica serves as the coalition's outreach coordinator and subject matter expert on workplace lactation support programs. My VDH colleague, Jareen Fleming, is the state's breastfeeding coordinator with the Office of Family Health Services, Division of Community Nutrition. In addition to the coordinating of the Virginia WIC breastfeeding program, she collaborates on multiple health department and community-based initiatives to promote, protect, and support human milk feeding. Angela, I'm going to ask you to advance to the next slide. So we want to just provide you some guidance on the GoToWebinar technology. Today, if you have questions, we ask that you please type your questions into the Q&A box. And we plan to address as many as we can. If we're unable to answer the questions during this 1-hour session, we'll include our responses on an FAQ sheet, which will be housed with the recording of today's presentation on the VDH website. All registrants will receive a link to the recording, and please note we also have a few handouts that you can download during the presentation. In terms of where to find the handouts and the questions and where to post questions, if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, you will see a number of different words with different arrows, and you should see a questions tab with an arrow, and you should also see a handouts tab with an arrow. You will probably need to click on the arrow so that it's facing downward. And if you do that, you'll see within the handouts there are 4 handouts for you to download today. Same thing with questions. Press on the arrow that it goes downward, and you should be able to type your questions there. All participants today are muted, but again, we encourage you to ask your questions in the questions box. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to hand it over to Jessica, who's going to begin our presentations for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am Showing my screen now. Co-presenters, is that the right one?
That's it. Looks great.
Yay, new technology. Well, hi everyone. I'm so excited to be here today to talk to you all about breastfeeding and work. The return to work can be a major hurdle for lactating parents, but thankfully there are now several laws that provide clear guidance for employers on how to meet their breastfeeding employees' core needs. So happy to be here today to talk with you about these legal requirements and to address how they have and have not changed due to the virus. First, before we dive into the laws, let's talk a bit about what breastfeeding employees typically need at work and why. First, lactating employees need time to express milk. That's often called pumping. And that's because lactating employees produce milk 24/7. It doesn't stop just because they're on the clock. And if it's not removed on schedule, either by feeding a baby or using a pump, the employee can experience severe health consequences. So what does that mean for the workday? Now, in a typical 8-hour shift, a parent may need to express breast milk on average 2 or 3 times. It's usually as often as a baby would typically nurse. But that time period will vary based on their body, their child's needs, and typical feeding schedule. Usually, the older the child, the longer the time between the pumping breaks. It will also vary by the hours the employee is away from their child. For instance, employees who need to travel a long way from their home to their job may need to pump soon after they arrive at work because they've already been separated from their infant for hours. If an employee is not able to pump on time or for the length of time they need, they can very quickly begin to experience pain. Missing or shortened pumping breaks often triggers infections which progress rapidly and regularly do send moms to the hospital. Next, lactating parents need a private and clean space to pump. Breast milk is food for little humans with new immune systems, and it needs to be bottled in a setting that reflects that. And of course, it is important for the parent to feel comfortable and not feel exposed. And most folks find that the more relaxed they are, the easier it is to get the job done quickly. Finally, some employees may need other accommodations. For example, a new uniform or permission to remove their uniform while pumping. Believe it or not, this was a real issue for armed service members a few years ago. So those are the basics. And studies have found that when breastfeeding workers had access to both the time and space they need, they're more likely to be breastfeeding at 6 months, and exclusively breastfeeding for 6 months is recommended by every major medical body because of the important health benefits. And those benefits include reduced risk for both the parent and the child in the short and long term. In addition to the health issues at play, here is another big reason I am so glad you all are here. The number of breastfeeding cases in the courts has skyrocketed in recent years. Here at the Center for Work-Life Law, we maintain a database of every breastfeeding, caregiving, and pregnancy-related case in our judicial system. We track the trends of these cases and use it to better understand what's happening on the ground. And we've discovered that the number of breastfeeding cases has grown over 800% in the last decade. Courts now agree that breastfeeding discrimination is a form of sex discrimination, and lactating workers are demanding their rights. This is a huge shift, and it reflects that breastfeeding is now the norm. Over 80% of Virginia's newborns are breastfed, and over 60% are still breastfed to some degree at 6 months. So that's a dramatic increase in the numbers of workers who need to pump on the job. But one bit of good news here is that our database also tells us that the increase in cases is not tied to the increase in laws like the one Virginia has. In fact, lawsuits in some places go down after the enactment of these laws. We believe this is because employers finally have clear rules rather than a confusing mix of federal laws. And we're confident that with the right education and tools, employers can give employees the accommodations they need and steer clear of liability, which is part of why I'm so glad you all are here today. So let's get into it. First, I will start off with a quick refresher on the many laws that have been in effect to protect lactating workers before July 1st. And now none of this is going to make you a lawyer. This is a relatively quick overview, but my hope is that you'll be familiar enough to understand your rights and obligations, and hopefully to point you in the right direction should you need more guidance. First, let's discuss the Fair Labor Standards Act break time for nursing mothers provision. This law requires employers, all employers, to provide their non-exempt employees with reasonable unpaid break time, and that must be provided as often as needed. It requires the provision also of a functional lactation space. That space is not a bathroom. It's free from view and intrusion. Now, let me break that down. The Department of Labor has advised that the requirement to provide a lactation space implies that space is functional, meaning, very simply, it's not 100 degrees. It should have somewhere to sit, and it shouldn't take an hour just for the employee to get there from their work site. It should be free from view, which means, for example, curtains on windows. And it should be free from intrusion, for example, a lock on the door. And this must be provided for up to 1 year after birth. Now, all workplaces are covered, but not all employees. And that's because the break time and space law was added to the section of the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act dealing with worker overtime. So typically, only workers that are eligible for overtime are protected by this federal law. Now, it's very fact-specific to determine who's covered. This can be complicated. If for some reason you do need help figuring it out, you can call the Department of Labor or you can call us. As you see on your screen, doctors, nurse practitioners, teachers, managers, lots of categories of workers are typically left out. But the ins and outs of who is covered under this law is actually no longer super important. It's not super important for our purposes today because the new Virginia law takes the complication out of all of this. We'll talk some more about that shortly. Another set of laws I'd like to quickly draw your attention to are general anti-discrimination laws, Title VII on the federal level, and the Virginia Human Rights Act here. This is a relatively new principle in the courts, but I think it's pretty intuitive. And the principle behind it is that discrimination on the basis of sex includes pregnancy, childbirth, and related medical conditions, including lactation. So breastfeeding discrimination is a form of sex discrimination and is illegal. Breastfeeding employees should have the same opportunities as other employees in the workplace. As a quick reference, here are a few other laws that protect lactating workers here in Virginia. Breastfeeding is permitted in any location the mother is lawfully present. State employees have protections which have already been clearly laid out in personnel policy. There's a link to it here. And schools also must have policies, actually for both students and employees. Again, though, the new laws fill some of the gaps from these existing policies. So let's get into it. As of July 1st, Virginia has a new law on lactation rights in the workplace. It's in the Virginia Pregnant Workers Fairness Act is now a part of the Human Rights Act. So who does it apply to? Well, it applies to employers with 5 or more employees. The more detailed fine print on that is that it's 5 or more employees for each working day and each of at least 20 calendar weeks, and that's in the current calendar year or in the preceding calendar year. So if this year, due to COVID, you only have 4 employees, but last year you had 15, you are still covered by this law. There may be other ways to account for the reduction in your workforce, but generally the law still applies for you. Unlike federal law, there are no big exemptions for certain job titles. So those doctors, teachers, managers, and all other overtime exempt people are covered by this law. And the law protects all of the employer's employees with known limitations related to pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions, including lactation. These limitations don't have to be a disability, though many of them indeed are disabilities. And unlike federal law, there is no age limit on coverage for lactating workers. So today we're focused on lactation, but as you can see, this law covers a lot of people. If you need another webinar or 10, let me know, because this is a big shift. So what are accommodations? Accommodations are changes to how, when, or where an employee works in order to allow the employee to keep working and meet their health needs. Now, a reasonable accommodation is one that allows the worker to meet their health needs without also causing an undue hardship for the employer. First, I'm going to talk about some common accommodations, and then we're going to talk about that big reasonableness question. So, the most common accommodations for lactating workers, they're actually spelled out directly in the law. First, pumping breaks as needed. That length of time is, again, going to vary based on the person. It will also vary based on the facilities. So if somebody has a lactation space that is on the complete opposite side of campus, for example, it takes a 10-15 minute walk. That walk is a part of their pumping time. Also, if there's no facilities for example, for cleaning pumping parts, so like a sink, that's going to take more time for the worker. So as a rule, the better the lactation space, the quicker the worker is able to have their needs met. It's also true in part because lactating workers tend to be able to pump more quickly when they're able to be relaxed. And in a server closet or a room that is 110 degrees, it's challenging to do so, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. Other important part is that these pumping breaks don't need to be paid unless they're taken at the same time as a paid break, vacation sick time, salaried flexible time, or other time where the employee is actually working and therefore entitled to payment. We can talk a little bit more about this later. Next, as you've already guessed, the law specifically mentions the provision of a private lactation space that's not a bathroom. So private, free from view, that's curtains, and free from intrusion, that's locks. I always very careful to mention that this does not need to be a permanent space. It doesn't mean that you have to build an entirely new building. It just means meeting this basic test of private, hopefully sanitary, and free from view and intrusion. So a lot of employers are able to repurpose existing spaces such as conference rooms, unused offices that just need a curtain or some of that window film that clouds the space. Other people have found some other ways to make it work. Pop-up tents, for example. I've seen farm workers and workers who are outside use pop-up tents or refrigerated cabs of a truck. There are all sorts of ways to meet this that don't require an expensive new building. And the ideal space, as I mentioned, is near the work area and near a sink. Now, storage isn't mentioned specifically in the law, but I would like to add storage for your consideration. Sorry, can everybody please make sure you're muted? I've heard from workers at a number of businesses, but especially for some reason lately, grocery stores, who aren't permitted to bring in bags to work. So a very simple, reasonable accommodation is to allow the employee to bring in her pump in a bag and keep a cooler at work to keep her breast milk safe. Those are the most frequent types of accommodations. Very small exceptions to the rule made to ensure that employees can keep doing their jobs while protecting their health and their child's health. I will also note that common shared refrigerators are an acceptable storage place if the worker is comfortable with that. Both CDC and OSHA have put out information that it's not a biohazard and it's not a health risk. But if there is no refrigerator, permission to bring a cooler can go a long way. Next, here are some less common accommodations. Every now and then, a worker who is unable to manage their lactation needs on their job as is may need a shift in the job, modified work schedules to match their health needs, temporary transfer to a position, for example, that's inside, that allows them to take these breaks. But it's important to mention that this should not be a demotion or a reduction in salary. It should be lateral. Even if it's not usually lateral, keep paying them the same. And here's the big one, childbirth leave. I know some folks are panicking right now. I will mention there is no paid leave requirement, but a childbirth leave may be a reasonable accommodation for some employees. The most often time that I see this is an employee who's relatively new to the job and is not entitled to other job protected leave. Perhaps they're on probation and they're not able to take sick or vacation time. Unpaid leave of absence for childbirth is a great way to make sure that that worker is able to properly heal and is healthy and can keep their job and come back and be productive for you all. I'm always caution folks to be careful to provide at least the same options as those provided to people with temporary disabilities. That's already the law under federal law, but want to flag that a lot of folks don't realize that temporary disability policies or unpaid leave policies do cover pregnant workers and workers with related medical conditions such as recovery from childbirth. And if you are in a situation where providing childbirth leave is a burden, there are lots of other options. For example, a lot of folks are able to telework. That allows them a little bit of more flexibility to take care of their health, or schedule modifications. For example, intermittent leave, working part-time, working a schedule that is a little bit less burdensome on the employee. This is one of the reasons why I'm so happy that we have a Pregnant Workers Fairness Act here, which has an interactive process requirement. It's not written in law that you absolutely have to provide childbirth leave for every single worker, but the law does have some flexibility so that both the needs of the employer and the needs of the worker can be met. So how are these accommodations provided? Let's talk about what reasonable accommodations look like, how you get there. So first, an employee makes their limitation known. If it's reasonable, provide the accommodation they've requested. If it's trickier though, the law requires you to engage in an interactive process to figure out the next best option. That process needs to be timely. Don't want to keep them waiting for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks while you figure it out. If it is going to take a long time to figure out an accommodation, providing an interim accommodation is the next best step. For example, time off or permission to go home to take pumping breaks if you don't have a space. There are lots of options there, but you do need to act fast. It needs to be in good faith and interactive, a true conversation. It needs to be a process. It's not one email and you're done. So here's an example. The woman in this picture's name is Stephanie Hicks, and she was a police officer in Alabama. It wasn't feasible for Hicks to keep her normal duties out in the field and get pumping breaks, and she was unable to wear her bulletproof vest that's a part of her normal uniform. For her employer, the options were go on patrol with no vest and no adequate pumping plan, or stop working. But there was another option. It turned out the department actually did allow officers who couldn't go on patrol to have a light duty desk assignment. Had they engaged in a good faith process with Stephanie and considered all of the options, they should have provided this other option. Instead, they were found by a federal court to have violated anti-discrimination law. Now let's talk about reasonableness. These accommodations don't need to be provided if they pose an undue hardship. That's judged in relation to the type of business, the composition, the structure of your workforce, the size of the facility that this particular employee is working in, and the type and cost of the accommodations that are needed. Now, that's a pretty high bar when it comes to lactation accommodations. Most lactation accommodations are simple and cheap. We're talking about curtains over windows and locks on doors for the most part. Some workplaces we're talking about a $30 pop-up tent. They tend to be a lot cheaper than some folks initially expect. And here's another reason why this is a high bar. We've seen this articulated at the federal level and in other states, high bar for lactation accommodation exemptions, but it's actually also written into Virginia law. So the fact that an employer provides or is required to provide a similar accommodation to other employees creates a presumption that that accommodation isn't an undue hardship. So what that means is, for example, the fact that workplaces are already required to provide break time and a private non-bathroom space to most workers, those are the non-exempt workers, might mean that a court finds you need to provide it to all workers. You're already required to do that under a federal law. It's unlikely that a court is going to find it is an incredible lift for you to provide that to a few more workers. Of course, though, this is a rebuttable presumption. So if for some reason this particular employee is incredibly difficult to accommodate or the situation has changed, you can assert that. But again, I want to come back to the interactive process. Following through with the interactive process is the best tool for avoiding liability and also for supporting your employees. That's good faith, timely conversation to identify options that work is going to protect you from liability, and that worker will hopefully get something, even if they're not getting the exact accommodation they originally asked for. Although again, when it comes to workers who have that very basic need for break time and space, that is a very easy bar to reach. You should be able to provide that with just a little creativity. Here are a few other requirements of the law. The first three of these are already protected under federal laws, so no retaliation for requesting accommodations, no denying opportunities because of the need to make accommodations. So for example, you have a great new assignment for someone, but you assume they can't because they're going to need to be breastfeeding, or you rescind an offer for employment because you find out someone might need break time and space. That would be illegal under this law and federal laws. No forced leave. You can't say, sorry, you need to take unpaid leave because I can't make this work. You have to figure out any available options that keeps the worker in their position, if at all possible. And then two provisions that are specific to Virginia law. One is that if you have an employee handbook, you need to include these protections in the handbook. And the last one is that you should inform your employees on their first day of work and within 10 days of providing notice of their pregnancy of these rights. And if anyone needs help figuring out the right language, I'm sure pretty much everyone on the call would be happy to help you sort through the best way to inform your workers. Next, enforcement. The law provides for enforcement by the Division of Human Rights or local human rights or human relations agency. I have a link here for both employees with complaints and employers with questions. There's also a right to file suit. So if someone is discriminated against on the basis of lactation, they can take it to court and there are damages attached. So let's address a couple common mistakes. The first one is not paying a working employee, and this is a big one. This may mean an employee who is taking a paid break. An employee who's taking a paid break for pumping should have access to the same amount of time that folks get for other purposes. So for example, if you provide 15 minutes without clocking out for non-pumping breaks, you should provide it for pumping workers. But assuming she needs 30 minutes to pump, that next 15 minutes would be unpaid. If folks are allowed to have paid lunch breaks, they should be able to use that paid lunch break for expressing breast milk. If a worker is allowed to take sick leave or vacation time in small increments, they should be allowed to use that for their pumping breaks. It also applies to workers who are still performing duties on the clock. Now, you can't force an employee to pump while working, but some employees want to do so because they don't want to miss out on that pay or fall behind on their duties. So, for example, I know lots of employees who answer phone calls or check emails while they're pumping, who do simple filing or collating, writing, all of these activities that can be done privately at their desk while also pumping. You still need to pay them for that time, but you can't force them to work while also pumping. They're entitled to those breaks. It also applies to salaried workers. For them, typically the test isn't the exact minutes that they're working every day, it's whether they're getting their duties done. So they shouldn't be forced to make up every single minute of their work so long as they're doing their job. But of course, many of these workers will need to stay a bit longer to make sure that they are still performing their duties. Another common mistake is making assumptions to an employee's detriment, so assuming they won't want the increased activity that a promotion will bring or that they do want leave. Failing to ensure break time coverage, so workers often are told, yeah, you can take a break, just find someone to cover you. That can be incredibly challenging for employees, and it can result in a situation where the worker actually doesn't get the break that they're entitled to. So you want to be very, very clear about how to make sure they get the coverage they need, and that you as an employer set the tone so that you're sure they are getting those breaks that they need. At the end of the day, you are responsible. The same thing goes for the availability of shared spaces. So I often hear of conference rooms being designated as a lactation space, and the worker has to fight to get in. If that's happening on your watch, you might be liable for it. Next, comments about the employee's breastfeeding or their family. Often these comments are well-meaning, but of course we're talking about sensitive body parts here, and what can be more sensitive than how you choose to take care of your child, right? So we want to be very, very careful that you don't accidentally discriminate. Following old rules, I think the bag example at the grocery store is a great example of this. The rule is you can't bring bags in. Well, that rule may work for 99% of employees, but you do need to consider shifting those rules when it comes to these pregnant workers. As the employer, you are empowered to make those rules, and the law now requires you to have a bit of flexibility in situations like this where it's reasonable. And then finally, the big mistake is not asking for help. Everybody on this call has had experience counseling, on this presentation, has had experience counseling breastfeeding workers and their employers. We have tons of ideas of how to make it work without causing a huge burden for you all. And so before you deny an employee an accommodation, please reach out. We might have thought of something that maybe you haven't thought of yet. Now, very quickly, I will address how has the COVID-19 crisis changed what your obligations are to lactating workers under the law. Well, first of all, I want to encourage you all to check out the new regulations by the Department of Labor and Industry. There's a link here on your screen. It's also in the PDF. And please visit this because they are brand new, and I know a lot of folks haven't seen them yet. There are a couple regulations that have an impact on breastfeeding employees. Usually, I think that's mostly limited to the regulations regarding common spaces. So that's pages 19 and 20 for those of you who are going to dig in. The first thing is controlled access to common spaces. We need to make sure that access is controlled now so that the number of folks in a space is appropriate to follow social distancing guidelines. And that is super important, again, because of the fights that break out about access to these shared spaces. As the employer, it's up to you to set the standard that these lactating workers have priority access for these spaces and make sure that there are enough spaces to meet their needs, even with these social distancing guidelines. There's also a requirement to put up signage about the occupancy, cleanliness requirements, to perform regular disinfecting, which I know would be a big concern for a lot of lactating workers in their pumping rooms. And where social distancing is not feasible, there are some masking requirements. And that might also apply in a lactation space. At the individual level, what is the impact? Well, I'm sure everyone on this call is feeling it, increased stress and vulnerability. There's high demand for protective equipment and other accommodations. Lactating employees are probably readjusting to pumping after working from home. It's not quite like riding a bike. It can take a bit of practice, and so it might take employees a tiny bit longer when they first go back to work. And the big one here is increased concern about contamination. Lactating workers are interested in more time to clean. They might demand isolated space. But big question here, have the legal rights changed? No, the test is still the same. An undue hardship is still a high bar for these break time and space requirements. Recent changes, though, may have made the setting at some businesses so desperate that you now meet that high bar. The new space and time demands do make it harder to provide accommodations, and undue burden is judged in light of a company's finances and staffing and so on, all of which may have changed in the crisis. So as a result, for some limited circumstances, some requests that may have been reasonable before are now unreasonable in a crisis setting. But of course, don't forget there are other accommodations required. So I think a great example of this is an ICU nurse. It may now be challenging for her to get that break time and space that she needs. But because we're looking at this interactive process, hopefully the employer will see that it might be possible to transfer that ICU nurse to a different floor where it's less intense and she has the ability to take the break times that she needs. Even in the most challenging settings, there are likely options. And the reasonable accommodation process has not changed as a result of the COVID crisis. It's still that interactive process designed to meet the needs of the worker and allow her to stay productive. And if in doubt, again, ask for help. So a couple ideas I've seen include implementing more temporary rooms. So often that means adding curtains or window films to offices, adding locks on doors that didn't lock before. Staggered work schedules so that moms aren't all working the same 8 to 5 and pumping on similar schedules. Allowing flex time so that workers don't have to stress about getting their pumping done superhumanly fast. And then there's also employee solutions. For example, having an extra set of pump parts so that you don't have to wash all of them thoroughly every time. Now, as an employer, you can't demand it, but we definitely have some ideas that you could share. And finally, take a close look at the tone. The more stressed a lactating employee is, the more difficult all of this is going to be, and a policy is required by law. So is yours supportive? Who's responsible for overseeing your rooms? Who's responsible for cleaning? I'd encourage all of you to prepare for this before it is an urgent need. And now I've raised this. Be willing to ask for help. If you want to know more, please do contact us for follow-up questions. I'm happy if any of you reach out to me. We also have a legal hotline specifically for COVID-related issues and resources for employers and employees. And I'm excited to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Now we're going to be handing it over to Monica and Angela.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you guys hear me?
You sound great.
Great, thanks. Hello, my name is Monica Brannon. Angela and I will be presenting lactation programs in the workplace. We're going to discuss some practical solutions for implementing a lactation program. We have used the business case for breastfeeding as a framework to tailor this presentation and hopefully answer some of your questions. Health educators typically promote breastfeeding as the right thing because of the positive health outcomes for infants and mothers. Breastfeeding is the biological norm and as such should be supported. From the business perspective, however, it may be not an easy choice, especially if the ROI is not perceived as high enough. Policy and practice decisions are therefore based on their impact on the company's ROI. The findings of these other studies examining economic impact on breastfeeding show that supporting breastfeeding employees leads to lower healthcare costs for businesses. Breastfeeding is reported to be good for businesses. Companies such as Aetna and Cigna have implemented lactation support programs and have found an ROI of 2 to 1 and higher. Research shows that when babies are healthier, mothers, fathers, partners, and the like are less likely to miss work to care for a sick child. When a breastfed baby does become ill, the baby is likely to recover more quickly, reducing the duration of the parent's absence. One-day absences occur twice as often for employees who do not breastfeed. Cigna found that their lactation program resulted in a 77% reduction in lost work time with an annual cost savings of $60,000. Absenteeism rates are also lower among male employees with female partners who breastfeed. Some companies offer nursing support for female partners of the male employees to help reduce absenteeism of fathers. Examples include on-site education for fathers and their partners and the provision of breast pumps for their partners. When employers and coworkers are concerned about having to provide coverage for nursing employees, take into account that employee breaks are predictable, absences are not. It is far easier to plan for the minimal coverage that it may take when an employee uses her usual breaks to express milk than it is to plan coverage for a full day when a mother or father must miss work due to a sick child. The national retention rate after maternity leave is 59%. But for companies with the lactation program, the retention rate is 90%. Retention is a leading challenge for businesses today. This is because replacing valuable employees is costly. Costs include both separation costs and the actual replacement costs. One study found that it costs approximately 1.5 times the person's salary to replace them. Businesses also report that it is far easier and more cost-effective to retain their current valuable employees than to hire and retrain new ones. At the Breastfeeding Coalition, on a regular basis, we receive emails from employees who are frustrated with the lack of workplace accommodations and resort to finding employment elsewhere due to lack of support. Employees of companies providing lactation support feel more productive and loyal to the company. This section includes case studies of companies that have implemented comprehensive lactation support programs and have experienced a positive ROI. We have selected across a wide range of industries and circumstances in hopes of giving you ideas and templates from which to work. AOL has 15 locations in the United States. They have made a commitment to be family-friendly. Their Well Baby program consists of support for their employees before, during, and after pregnancy to reduce pregnancy-related costs. The program also includes prenatal education to help employees have a healthy birth outcome. All the buildings across the country have a lactation room with a number of comfortable amenities, which include a chair and a flat surface for a breast pump. They offer 2 types of multi-user breast pumps. Some rooms have a sink and other amenities. All employees have access to a lactation consultant that can assist them with problems and concerns as they arise. AOL offers educational materials and classes to pregnant and breastfeeding families. A unique thing that AOL offers is sending breastfeeding information and support via their instant messaging system, both during pregnancy and in the postpartum period. AOL's Well Baby program has resulted in a significant increase in breastfeeding rates. 84% of AOL employees initiate breastfeeding as compared to the national average of 76%. This program has also contributed to a decrease in the rate of premature births and infant mortality. One employee stated, "The Well Baby program is one of the top 3 reasons I keep working at AOL. I truly feel supported during my pregnancies and took advantage of the classes, pump rooms, and advice from the lactation consultants and nurses. I have many working mom friends, and this benefit truly sets AOL apart from other companies." Every business has its own unique needs, goals, and business environment. Breastfeeding support can therefore fit within the confines of any business parameter or scenario. The first step is to get input from both company and community stakeholders who have ideas and resources to share. Company stakeholders to consider involving can be current or past pregnant and breastfeeding employees, human resources or wellness staff, facilities managers, public relations staff, and supervisors. Community stakeholders can be local coalitions, lactation consultants, staff from your local WIC office, La Leche League leaders, and healthcare providers. Some of these entities may also provide direct health and breastfeeding support to employees and perhaps provide on-site education and training for supervisors. Together with company and community stakeholders, your business can determine how many employees will likely be affected, what the needs of the employees are, program components that should be considered, physical modifications needed, policies and oversight, feedback and evaluation. Once the needs have been identified, a plan to address those needs can be developed. In your handouts that we've provided, a planning tool that you can use to tailor your company's specific needs. The National Institute of Health created a formula to help discern the number of individual milk expression stations needed. When companies have fewer employees, flexible options might be more useful. Some company policies outline responsibilities of employers, which include providing space and reasonable time, provision of breast pumps, education, and other benefits. Responsibilities of employees might include communicating lactation needs to supervisor before leaving for childbirth, maintaining the milk expression area, storing milk in appropriate locations, using appropriate break times, and other time needed in consultation with supervisors. One of your other handouts is a basic outline of what to add to your lactation policy. We're now going to present a few case studies to demonstrate a wide variety of industries, some of which may be applicable to your business setting. Shaw Industries has an employee base of 23,000 with headquarters in Dalton, Georgia. The company is the world's largest producer of carpet and floor coverings. Breastfeeding women who work here are supported with space and time to express milk. Private space was identified in an office area in a quieter part of the factory. The room was made functional by cleaning out unneeded items and covering the window in the door to provide privacy. Amenities include a table, small refrigerator, educational materials, and some decorative items. Ryder Affiliated Farms in California staffs more than 28,000 employees in various farms. Seasonal workers are hired to pick strawberries, blueberries, and other berries grown at the farm. Most employees work outdoors where finding private spaces to express milk is often a challenge. A portable water station is used for washing hands and breast pump parts. A portable pop-up tent is placed near the fields where the women work. The tent is approximately 4 feet by 4 feet and is nearly 6 feet tall. This can allow for airflow and ventilation. The tent also collapses for easy transport to other locations as needed. Women store their milk in personal coolers with ice packs. Another option provided is to allow women to park their car or the company car near the workstation. Privacy visors are provided. Goodwill Industries. Goodwill Industries provides gently used items at low cost. Employees are afforded a comfortable and clean working environment. And as you can see, with minimal investment, accommodations can be provided for breastfeeding mothers. This leads to satisfied and productive employees and provides a win for both the company and its employees. At Nutrition Fundamentals in California, breastfeeding employees receive support. The Primetime Building is one of the WIC-only stores provided by the agency. Breastfeeding women work at the warehouse and store and take flexible breaks as needed to express their milk. Inside the warehouse area, private space is difficult, so the company created a space in a corner. A wooden screen is used to create privacy in the corner of the warehouse. Breastfeeding posters cover the partitions. The space is small, as you can see, but large enough to accommodate a chair and a flat surface for the breast pump. Curtains help to provide additional privacy to enclose the space. Middletown High School in Connecticut provides several options for supporting nursing women. The large building means that multiple private space options were needed to minimize the amount of break time taken. School administrators work with teachers to arrange schedules that allow for milk expression when they return from maternity leave. Teachers cover for one another as needed. They also have float teachers that can provide additional coverage for any teacher who needs to be away from the class. The custodian at the school helped to identify a private room for milk expression. A corner of the teacher's resource room is used for milk expression. Bookshelves covered with a curtain add a layer of privacy. A small refrigerator there is used to store milk. The door can be locked and an in-use sign alerts other teachers and staff when it's available. The superintendent, Dr. Patricia Charles, sets the tone for lactation support. All the schools in the district provide time and space for nursing women employed by the district. The University of Southern California has created several permanent milk expression rooms on campus, including one in the new student center. The space has a sink with running water, a comfortable chair with a flat surface for the breast pump as well. One space at USC was created within the ladies' locker room in the fitness center. USC even modified the international breastfeeding symbol in their school colors. Signs are posted outside buildings where the lactation space is available. The locker room provides privacy from other students and people in the building. The ladies' locker room area is clean and dry, with separate shower units away from the main locker room. Inside the space is a vinyl chair with arms, a shelf for the breast pump and supplies, an electrical outlet, and a lamp with some soft lighting. Right in our backyard in Greenbelt, Maryland, is NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. They offer a full program of support for nursing women. The company provides private milk expression rooms in 17 of their buildings on their campus. Signage outside the rooms indicates the purpose for the room and provides privacy. The lactation room includes a comfortable chair, multi-user breast pump, and a dry erase board to help with space reservation. The room also includes a microwave and a sink for washing hands and breast pump parts. Breastfeeding and parenting resources are also included and available. Another milk expression room has a desk, a comfortable chair, along with a multi-user breast pump. A unique feature of this program is the availability of supermoms. Each building with a lactation room also identifies a woman who has previously breastfed her baby and used the facilities provided by the company. The supermom now serves as a resource for other women who work in her building. There are a number of tools and resources available to fully implement a successful lactation support program in your company. Some resources are the Department of Health and Human Services, the Office of Women's Health, the Business Case for Breastfeeding, and us, the Virginia Breastfeeding Coalition. We are here to help and support you as you help to support our breastfeeding families. You may reach us at hello@babreastfeedingcoalition.org. Thank you.
Thanks, Monica. And now we will turn it over to Jareen Fleming.
Good morning. I'm so happy that you all were able to join us today. This webinar will go over 60 minutes, so if you have to leave, it will be recorded and posted, and we will certainly let you know when that is available. This presentation is based on integrate current CDC guidelines to develop safe workplace lactation spaces, pandemic considerations for lactating workers in California, which was developed by Caroline Wick, Lactation Accommodation Program Coordinator for the University of California, San Francisco. Caroline manages 58 lactation rooms among UC's 12 campuses and has graciously given us permission to adapt her work. In preparation for a return to in-person activities, UCSF developed health and safety protocols to assure the well-being of staff and students by reducing the risk of spreading the COVID-19 virus. Many of these best practices can be applied in a variety of business settings. Lactation rooms are high-traffic shared spaces utilized by multiple employees during the work period. Today, I'll share a three-step process developed at UC to assure workplace safety in the context of COVID-19 that can be replicated within your organization. In this three-step process, CDC guidelines will be reviewed, integrated into existing federal and state workplace accommodation laws, and third, your existing policies should be examined with your internal and external partners to determine what enhancements are needed. There are 3 CDC guidelines and recommendations related to workplace lactation and COVID-19: care for breastfeeding women, how to keep your breast pump kit clean, and cleaning and disinfecting your facility. As you can see from the icons, there is overlap in the recommendations, including the advice to wash hands frequently with soap and water for 20 seconds or to apply hand sanitizer when using shared spaces and before and after expressing milk or touching pump or bottle parts. In the Care for Breastfeeding Women document, there is a recommendation for wearing face coverings. How to Keep Your Breast Pump Clean recommends cleaning and disinfecting dials, power switches, and countertops after each use, which correlates with cleaning and disinfecting your facility. That CDC guideline gives more detailed instructions. Current evidence suggests that COVID-19 virus can remain viable for hours and even days on surfaces. Cleaning visibly dirty surfaces followed by disinfection is a best practice measure for the prevention of the spread of COVID-19 and other viral illnesses in community settings. Cleaning and disinfecting your facility provides guidance for cleaning and disinfecting rooms occupied by people with confirmed or suspected cases of COVID-19. Some key takeaway points from this document is to clean and disinfect high-touch areas such as light switches, countertops, sinks, doorknobs and dials, and soft surfaces with specific EPA agents, which can be found on the CDC website. Overall, more frequent cleaning and disinfection needs to be carried out during pandemic conditions. So how does this fit with the existing lactation accommodation laws? Pretty seamlessly. On the left are Virginia requirements, and on the right are the CDC guidelines. The Code of Virginia Human Rights Act of 2020 requires that employers should provide reasonable accommodations for known limitations related to pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions, which includes lactation, provide access to a private location other than a bathroom for the expression of breast milk, and to make reasonable accommodations, including more frequent breaks to express breast milk. So you can see how those requirements align with the CDC guidelines, and the iconography makes it quite simple to follow. As Jessica mentioned, the new regulations created by the Virginia Safety and Health Codes Board will be going into effect soon. On the left of this slide are the relevant provisions included in the Emergency Temporary Standard, and on the right are the requirements included in the Virginia Human Rights Act and the CDC guideline icons. The emergency standards state, the employer shall limit occupancy of the designated common area or room so that occupants can maintain physical distancing, and the company shall enforce that occupancy limit. Lactation spaces fit into this. This clause should be carefully considered and may require additional lactation spaces be identified if demand is high, as it may create a time crunch for workers expressing milk if access must be limited to allow for proper physical distancing and time to clean in between uses. This is when a method of scheduling the space can be really important. It can be as simple as a shared Google Calendar, which has worked well in the VDH program. Training and outreach products are being developed by VOSH Cooperative Programs Division and will be made available soon. Please visit the Department of Labor and Industry website listed on the resource page for more information. Now that we understand recommendations and how they align with legal requirements, we suggest that you take the next step and examine areas that need enhancement in your lactation program protocols. It's important to identify your partners, internal departments, active vendors, and users. Key partners are the entities that provide oversight on cleaning facilities and workplace safety. A collaborative approach is helpful to identify the areas that need enhancement to meet CDC and Virginia Safety and Health Codes Board guidelines. Years ago, when UC created their lactation program, they drew up a very detailed agreement with the custodial services team for routine cleaning of the lactation rooms. They also followed the university lactation accommodation policy that covered break periods and room features. In light of the pandemic, they re-examined that agreement and the daily and monthly routine tasks, which you can see here are very plainly delineated: emptying the trash bins, disinfecting surfaces, cleaning the floors, making sure that furniture is wiped with disinfectant spray, and then monthly activities of cleaning out the refrigerator. I also like that they included expectations for the room users in that original document. After reviewing in light of the COVID-19 virus, they added several steps: more frequent cleaning, supplying disinfecting wipes for the users of the room, adding CDC COVID recommendation signage, and an upgraded protocol for soft surface cleaning. They also expanded the expectations for the lactation room users and added signs in the room to address those responsibilities. To simplify our program at VDH, we decided to temporarily stop using fabric-covered chairs. This sign, which was in use prior to the pandemic, is posted in the lactation room to foster a sense of community and shared responsibility. This facilities department sign directs users on how to make service requests. This can be very helpful, especially for large programs. Some of the new COVID signage includes this guidance from the CDC Care for Breastfeeding Women guidance document. The hand washing sign on the left of the slide is posted above every sink on campus. The other signs remind lactation room users to wear masks and to use the provided materials. UC is adopting the use of hospital curtains to separate spaces. The curtains minimize risk of cross-contamination. They are economical, easy to install, and easy to launder and disinfect. On the right is one of their current rooms with ergonomic adjustable chairs, an ADA accessible desk, and a multi-user breast pump mounted on a trolley. More examples of lactation spaces, this one from the State Health Department Madison Building Program. To recap, we compared CDC guidelines, integrated and aligned them with Virginia workplace lactation accommodation requirements, and showed you how to examine and discuss your policies with internal and external partners. I hope you will find this helpful as we work together to make our workplaces safe.
I'd like to share with you briefly about Virginia's Breastfeeding Friendly Workplace Recognition Program. The Recognition Program is a partnership with the Virginia Department of Health and the Virginia Breastfeeding Coalition. We recognize workplaces that are meeting and going beyond state and federal requirements to provide breastfeeding support to employees and their families. We have 3 award levels: gold, silver, and bronze. And you can access the application on the website. So if you look here on the slide that we have the application is directly on virginiabreastfeedingcoalition.org website. So why would you want to be recognized and apply for the recognition program? If you have a strong lactation support program for your employees, it's a really great way to advertise to new and current employees that you stand up and support them in their work environments. Employees and families are looking for breastfeeding supportive environments in their workplaces. What will you receive if you apply and are accepted to any of the levels? You will receive recognition through media such as social media, also press release will be given to you, and you will receive a workplace certificate given by the Virginia Department of Health and Virginia Breastfeeding Coalition. Can you move to the next slide? So in terms of applications, we've extended the application deadline to August 31st. We encourage workplaces that have attended this webinar here today to apply to the recognition program. If you have specific questions as you're filling out your application, or if you have more specific questions about the about your lactation program and how it may meet meeting some of this criteria, we encourage you to reach out to Virginia Breastfeeding Coalition. And if, as you'll see here, the email address for Virginia Breastfeeding Coalition is here on the screen. So I am going to, thank you, Angela. So there were a number of, a lot of you posted questions today in the question and answer box. Thanks to Jessica, she's begun answering some of those questions. And I didn't know if, do we want to do maybe one question as we wrap up here today? We will be documenting all the questions and answers, and they're going to be on the VDH website. Jessica, is there one question that you think it would be great for other people to kind of hear, or one that you haven't gotten to yet that you'd like to answer orally?
Yeah, there's one last question here. Is the law strictly for employers? What about facilities such as convention centers, churches, etc.? Are they required to have dedicated stations? And my understanding is that, of course, the public breastfeeding law applies. Indecent exposure laws are different for breastfeeding parents. So technically, if somebody is present in that location, while I don't think it's clearly articulated, I imagine they should feel comfortable pumping in those spaces. But there is no current legal requirement for lactation spaces for patrons. So, for example, somebody who works at a church or a convention center would absolutely be entitled to a lactation space and break time to be able to access that space. But people attending an event there are not mandated to be provided that space. But of course, I encourage folks to do so. Does anyone else on the team have more to add about what that looks like in practice?
I know it's actually a selling point. So this is Angela with the Virginia Breastfeeding Coalition. Inevitably, conference organizers will reach out to us when they are doing a large event as far as how we can support and to make people comfortable, as well as to provide those accommodations. So it is something which is a wonderful marketing point, that you are being proactive and thinking in advance on how to support the people who are in that facility.
I've received a couple questions about the notice requirement. So I said you should provide notice on the first day of an employee's work and within 10 days of the employee notifying their supervisor that they are pregnant. That requirement of the law goes into effect 120 days after July 1st. So I believe that's October 29th. But the accommodations must be provided now. To clarify, the notice that you have to provide is that they have a right to request accommodations. And the simplest way to do that, honestly, is just to print out the law. But we can also help you draft some language if that's useful. And I've seen some folks have requested that. I can definitely get back to you with some sample language that you could pull from. There is a question, is the posting requirement for both men and women? Yes, I believe any worker who's pregnant, regardless of their gender presentation, should be informed, and the law requires you to provide this information to all new employees upon commencement of their employment. So I understand that might be a surprise to folks, but just consider it from here out one of your standard onboarding practices to provide that very basic information. You don't have to provide them an hour training on it, just a simple handout will do. And again, more requests for sample language. I will talk with the organizers of this presentation to make sure that you all get that language. And one other question that I just answered was about a lactation space which did seem to be free from view and intrusion, but it was open enough that you can still hear. For those of you unfamiliar, a breast pump makes a little sound. So the employer might want to speak with their employees about their level of comfort pumping within earshot of others. I have seen some workplaces where that was a trigger for workplace harassment. Just conversations about breasts tend to be a little bit dangerous in the workplace. But in my experience, folks have made it work, and I'd like to encourage you, again, those little creative solutions. So sound can be dampened by the use of white noise machines. They're very affordable. You can even use a super small speaker and a cell phone to help muffle the sound, or keeping pumps partially enclosed in a drawer or a bag will also greatly reduce the amount of sound that gets out. So if you have one of those tricky questions, again, the presenters on this call are really happy to talk through options with you. We've helped make it work for employers of all sizes, and I feel like a very lucky person that it's my day job to help folks get this right without fees. So please use us.
Great. And there was one other question here. Oh, and Angela actually just answered it. What website is the best resource in developing some training for my management team for this new law and regulations? And Angela mentioned the business case for breastfeeding. We will also have some of these resources and materials up on the VDH website, and I'm assuming they're, and as well as the Virginia Breastfeeding Coalition website too.
Absolutely, and I've taken the liberty of actually showing the business case for breastfeeding. It's quite a long URL. I will type it into the chat so that people can download this information on how to train their employees as well as their managers and supervisors.
But I will note that the business case for breastfeeding is not Virginia specific. If you want a specific training on this new law, please get in touch with me over email, and we can talk through options.
Great. Well, we thank everybody for their time today. Again, we recorded this session and have documented the questions and answers. So these will be up on VDH's website as well as Virginia Breastfeeding Coalition's website. We thank you for your time, and have a great remainder of your day.